another installment of Friday Q&A. We're back indoors for today's installment because while last week the sun was out and it was a glorious winter day in Perth, it's not like that today. It's just grey and wet. So it makes a lot more sense to be indoors. To everybody who submitted a question for this week's Q&A, thank you so much. I'm going to do my best to get to as many of those as possible. If you would like to ask me a question and have it answered on next week's video, simply put the question in the comment section below. A massive shout out to all my amazing patrons who make what I do here on the channel possible. If you'd like to sign up to the Patreon, or if you'd like to check out some of the music that I make with my band Ragdoll, check the video description. Let's dig straight into this week's questions. Let's start with a question about my free cab IR, and a reminder, if you don't have my free cab IR yet and you would like a free cab IR, it's linked in the video description. What's the difference between that one and the one with the suffix 500N? The one that says 500N at the end of it has been normalized and trimmed so that it can work in a variety of different modelers. I normally use that IR in my Fractal Axe-FX 3, FM3, or FM9, and that will automatically trim and normalize any IRs that go into it. Not all modelers do that, and that's been pointed out to me, so I figured it would just make sense to normalize it and trim it down to 500 milliseconds. I think a lot of modelers generally use much shorter IR lengths on there, but I just decided to include 500 on there for anybody who wants a 500 millisecond IR. It also makes me really happy anytime anybody writes to me and lets me know that they're actually making music with that cabinet IR. I feel like being able to share my favorite real-world cabinet and microphone settings with people, it's just a nice thing. And like I said, it kind of fills my heart with joy to know that people are getting some value out of it. A question about some new music. How do I like the new Carnival single? I love it. It's one of those songs that immediately sounds familiar. They just have a sound that is so well defined, but it also sounds really fresh and vital. It's also super catchy. I've been going through it with one of my students and I've had the song stuck in my head for a few days. So those guys also being Perth boys who I've had the pleasure of playing with in various different bands and things like that. It's just heartwarming to see them out there doing what they do and loving it. And if you're in Australia, make sure you go see them on tour. They're on tour at the moment, and hopefully they take that tour overseas so lots of other people can get to see them live. They are really one of Australia's great bands, not just one of Australia's great metal bands, but one of Australia's great bands. And I got to see them live last year, and that was just driven home. Like, what they do is very, very special, and we should cherish it while they're still doing it. When's the last time I gigged a tube amp? Excellent question. It was actually last year. I did 2 fill-in shows for Club Cabaret. I now play in Club Cabaret, which is kind of fun. I'll be at Edinburgh Fringe in August for anyone who is around and wants to see a really great circus show with live music. But I had already set up the sounds for the show on my FM9. However, the guitar player who was doing that season, Jared Van Dort, and shout out to Jared. Jared's a great player and a fantastic dude, said, hey, you're doing this fill-in, just use my rig. It's ready to go. So rather than have to have their front of house dial everything in again for my rig, I figured, you know what? I'm going to set the Deluxe Reverb really, really clean. I'm going to disable the cab block in my FM9, and I'm going to leave the amp block in there. It was just a JCM 800 set up for a crunch sound, and then I had a bunch of big reverbs, delays, and special effects going on, and it worked really, really well. I was essentially using the Deluxe Reverb speaker and its preamp as an amplifier, as you would with pedals, so a pedal platform. And I was kind of surprised because I thought, you know what, I just need to get through these 2 gigs. As long as I can have my big swelly reverb sounds and my crunch sounds on there, I'll be happy. And at soundcheck, when I plugged it in and got it all going, setting the amp quite clean, it was still really nice and loud on stage, but it wasn't really coloring the sound too much. I wasn't messing up what front of house had done, getting the mic and the speaker dialed in. That's such a massive part of the sound, but I was able to get all my textures happening with it. So that was the last time I gigged a tube amp, and it must have been 2015 or early 2016 before that instance on there. So a good 7 or 8 years between drinks there, and I was using my old DSL and dual rectifier rig, carting that around, which sounded amazing when you could get it to work in a room. But I went from using that to using an Axe-FX Ultra into the loop return of the DSL. And then I just decided, you know what? I've got this gig coming up. I'm going to try run direct. And the sound guy had really nice things to say about my sound. And I went, I'm never going back. So I have been back very, very briefly. But yeah, that's, I guess, the last 2 times I've used a tube amp over the last 7 or 8 years. Following on from that question, how would I put together a cover band gigging rig if the band has said you're not allowed to use a modeler? Well, I do exactly what I did for the last gig, where I'd probably just set up my modeler exactly the way I want it, and then I'd bring like a deluxe reverb, or I'd bring a Marshall DSL on a cab, and I'd just bypass the preamp on there and use the modeler for all the effects and the preamp sounds, then use the head or the power amp and a cabinet on stage. And I think that's totally a valid thing if bands want to have cabinets on stage. If you're playing, especially with other guitar players, and you're playing a modeler, but the other guitar player is just playing an amp and pedals, it makes so much sense to have a cabinet on stage and not have to fight the monitors and make it awkward for the sound crew and everybody else in the band. So yeah, in that case, I would say, just get a power amp and a cab. That's really what they want. They don't really want you to use a tube amp. They just want you to have sound on stage. But you could get around that, like I said, by using a tube amp as a dedicated power amp. The other thing that I'd suggest would be something like the Soldano Astro. Chuck a Fractal VP4 and 4 cable method with that, a 1x12, a 2x12, 4x12s, whatever you want to do on that. That is plenty loud for most cover band gigs you need. It's going to give you MIDI. It's going to give you 3 channels. It's going to give you an IR output on there. It's going to integrate with something like the VP4 really, really well. An expression pedal for wah, the SD1 model in the drive block for a boost, and then put a chorus and a delay in the loop after that. And you should be able to cover just about any tone you would need for a pop rock or rock cover band. So I'd go either of those ways. Like, just use your existing modeler with a power amp and cab, or grab something like a VP4 and HX Effects, or get a Boss SD1, put it in front of the amp, get a Boss SDE3, put it in the loop, and go to town. Speaking of the Boss SDE3, an SDE3 specific question, can you get it to remember to power up with a tap tempo function on there? I haven't seen a way that you can do that, but there might be a way to do this. I had a quick scan over the manual. I tried setting it up on the pedal very quickly. I think the best way to go about that would be to get an auxiliary switch on there, just an external switch that you can use for tap tempo on there, rather than have to worry about that tap and hold function. I do appreciate that there's the tap and hold function to activate tap tempo on that pedal, but if you're needing tap tempo all the time and you don't want to set it up every single time you power on, just do it that way. Like, get a $20 or $30 little auxiliary switch that works, leave it permanently connected. What I like about that as well is if you're somebody who uses an always on delay, then you could sit the delay like on top of your amp and just have the tap tempo switch wherever is convenient. Much smaller cable runs in that case, especially if you're running it in the loop. And again, someone's not going to accidentally turn your delay off, which is everybody's worst nightmare with an always on delay. And since we're talking about delay and reverb so much, how would I approach dialing in reverb and delay with a modeler or a hybrid setup from a home or studio setup to playing live? You can go one of two ways with this, and it seems to swing hard either way in each case. Either you'll dial in a really great sound at home and you'll take it out live and it will be way too wet, and front of house will just be like, dude, turn the delay and reverb down. Or you'll dial in a sound that you think is really nice and lush at home. You'll take it out and play live, and the room and the rest of the instruments just totally eat it up. I found the latter to be more of the case. And I remember a scenario a few years ago where we were sound checking with Ragdoll, and I had my main patch set up with all the big stereo lead delays and the pitch detune. And one of my friends who came to soundcheck said, "Oh man, when you guys were sound checking and I heard your guitar, I thought, whoa, that's way too much reverb and delay." But as soon as Ryan and Cam started playing, a lot of that got kind of absorbed by the mix. And because the reverb and delay and pitch detune were so prominent, they were able to like poke their head out on there so you could actually hear them. And a lot of the time you will find that gets lost. So it really is context specific. It depends on the sort of band or the ensemble that you're playing with. If it's a very, say, mellow setup where the drums and bass aren't super loud, then yeah, you can probably dial it back. For me, playing in a really loud rock trio, I need those delays and reverbs really up front so they cut through. One thing on a Fractal you can do is you can assign the delay and reverb mix to the perform page on there, which I call the soundcheck page. So you get to your soundcheck, you play, and you see how wet your delay and reverb are. You maybe ask the band if it's a good level. You maybe ask the monitor or sound engineer doing front of house if the reverb and delay are working. And a lot of the time they'll be like, yeah, it's totally fine. You're good to go. If it's too much, you turn it down. If it's not enough for you, you turn it up to the point where someone goes, whoa, that's a lot of delay and reverb, then you just bring it back slightly. That would be my advice. A lot of very cool ambient style reverb pedals have been coming out recently. I did a demo of the Hot Tone Verbera, which is amazing. Crazy Tube Circuits also released their Mirage stereo reverb pedal. A question from friend of the channel and certified legend Bob Guido: how would I go about replicating the Inch and Down preset on the Fractal? I had a quick listen to a couple of demos, Bob. It's a very, very tasty reverb sound on there. And a lot of the time when I hear pedal-based reverbs, when I try to recreate them in the Fractal, I find actually the Plex delay block is a really great place to start. The same sort of thing you might do on like an Eventide Eclipse, where you're going to use a bunch of diffused delay lines. I'd start out with maybe the number of delay times set at 4. So 4 delay lines, add a bunch of diffusion on there. It has that like oil tank echoey thing about it, just very washed out and very smooth. It sounds like there's a lot of low cut. There's some really well-voiced modulation on there, and all of the demos that I saw of that pedal sound fantastic. I've got the Splash, which is a great sounding reverb. The only thing I wished about the Splash was that it was stereo. So it looks like they just kind of took that idea, put 2 of them in one and said, hey, you want to run them in stereo? You want to run them in dual mono? You want to run it any way you like? You can basically do that. And they're definitely a company, anytime they release something, it's just so well thought out, and they're not just making clones or rehashing anything. They're going, how can we take this beyond what the original idea was? How can we make it more useful, more flexible, more versatile, while still sounding fantastic? And they're a company that I think every time they release a pedal, I go, oh, that's cool. And then I dig into it and I go, whoa, that's very cool. That is it for this week's Q&A. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've got questions for next week, pop them in the comments section below. Have a fantastic weekend. Go and make some greasy guitar noises, and I'll see you on the next one.